It's such a wonderful occasion for us. It's a very special day. It's Christmas Eve, and we have an amazing person who lived so close to the place our Lord Jesus Christ was born. And his work is so very special that it is absolutely so joyful for me personally to welcome him today and to welcome all of you to this wonderful occasion. And before I request him to say his initial comments, may I request Karen to please introduce herself. The prodigal daughter of soil returns, Karen D'Souza. Karen, please share something about yourself with the audience.
Sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Like Anil sir said, it's an absolute joy to be here and to be speaking to Mr. Peck today, along with Anil sir. On Christmas Eve, what makes it more special is the work, and we will talk a little bit more about it. But before that, I am Karen, like Anil sir said, and I've graduated from SOIL in 2015. I work with Goldman Sachs currently in HR, and well, I'll keep it short, and this is about me. Really looking forward to the next 1 hour of conversation.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much for co-hosting this with me.
Thank you.
So, how do you feel, Yoav, on this occasion today?
Well, it's wonderful to be joining you over there in Delhi, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you and Karen and the others who are here. I remember my visits to India with great fondness, and I was deeply inspired when I came to SOIL a couple of years ago and met your students and your staff. It's a wonderful project, your institute, and it was really terrific to be there. And now here I am in Jerusalem on Christmas Eve, about 4 kilometers from the birthplace of Jesus. Jesus didn't know that he was a Christian. He was born, lived, and died as a Jew. And when I read his writings, I feel very close to him. And so I feel close spiritually, and I also am close because just down the road is the place where he was born. So I thought if it was okay with you, I would share a couple of pictures of Manger Square in Bethlehem. So
Please, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so let's see if we can do that. Yes, so here is, can you see it?
Yes.
So this is Manger Square. That's the Church of the Nativity and the Christmas tree, just in the heart of Bethlehem. And here is the Nativity scene. Baby Jesus has just been born, and he's located right here with Daniel Akhle, who is a Palestinian activist, peace activist, and a tour guide who lives in Bethlehem. And he is one of our leaders at the Sulha Peace Project that I will tell you about as the conversation goes along. But Daniel is a wonderful guy, and he represents the Christian community in Bethlehem as well as the Muslim community, because Christians and Muslims live successfully and peacefully together in Bethlehem. So that'll give you a little bit of a taste of what's going on. You see the little stalls on the lower right-hand side. That's the annual Christmas market in Bethlehem. Unfortunately, it's quite empty because so few tourists are coming this year because of the COVID crisis. But they're still holding the Christmas market, and it's quite wonderful in Bethlehem. I've been there on Christmas, and it's really lovely to be there.
How wonderful. So, okay, so perhaps you can stop sharing this. So yes, thank you. So, describe to us about your life's journey. It's been a fascinating journey, and you have traveled many miles through a real adventure. And I think you are truly blessed to lead the life that you have. So tell us as to how did it all begin and how did you take the path that you have taken?
Well, I'm humbled by your question. As you can hear, my accent is not a native Israeli accent. I was born and raised in New York City, and my parents were both committed social activists. My father was a professor of psychiatry, my mother was a psychologist. And they say the children of the shoemaker go barefoot. So hopefully that's not the case in my family. From an early age, in fact, I figured out that just 60 years ago, in 1960, my father took me to my first demonstration, which was in the middle of Manhattan against the proliferation of nuclear weapons. I remember the police came in, and as we were sitting in the middle of Broadway, they marched among us with their horses. And I just remember as a 13-year-old boy looking up at these horses and wondering what would happen. But ever since that time, I've identified with social issues, the civil rights movement in the United States. In 1965, I got on a bus to join Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama, for the famous march in Selma. But halfway to Selma, we were in touch with the organizers, and they asked us to divert to Washington, D.C., where we sat in front of the White House. They needed a presence at the White House at the same time that the march was happening in Mississippi. So civil rights were important to me, but I think the thing that really crystallized my political identity was the Vietnam War. I narrowly escaped being drafted into the Army and being sent to Vietnam. And I was a student and I was privileged, so I was able to get out of the draft. And instead, I went to work against the war in Vietnam, which included many demonstrations, particularly in Berkeley, where I completed my bachelor's degree in Berkeley, California. And I was arrested and beaten up a little bit, and nothing compared to what others had suffered, but it really helped to be tear gassed and arrested in order to get a sense of how serious the struggle was and had to be if we were ever going to stop the war. And I would say that, and there's plenty of documentation, that the anti-war movement in the States is what prevented Richard Nixon from using nuclear weapons in Vietnam and ultimately led to the American collapse in 1975 when this tiny nation, Vietnam, emerged victorious. In the summer of 1972, I came to Israel more or less as a left-wing tourist to see if I could figure out what was going on in the Middle East. And I gave myself 2 weeks to figure out the Middle East. And 48 years later, I'm still working on it. But to my amazement, I found myself falling in love with the people of Israel and Palestine. I went to visit refugee camps, Palestinian camps in Gaza and in the West Bank, and I discovered that I could not think of a good reason to go back to California. So I stayed on. My wife and I, my first wife and I joined a kibbutz, which is a collective agricultural settlement in the Galilee. And we had 2 children there and lived for 15 years on the kibbutz. But at the same time, I became increasingly aware of the occupation of the Palestinians that began at the close of the 1967 war. And the same values of justice and the longing for justice and the demand for justice that was born in the civil rights and Vietnam movements awakened here in Israel when I realized that after 2,000 years of homelessness, the Jewish people had established a home that we could defend and never have to run away again. But that in the course of creating our new home, we had subjugated another people. And 700,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes or fled their homes under threat during the Independence War in 1948. And it became clear to me that the celebration of Israeli independence could not be complete as long as it rested on the suffering and persecution of 3 million Palestinians living in Gaza and in the West Bank. So I went to work in the peace movement. I joined various organizations, and I'll just do it quickly. What basically happened to me in the peace movement was lots of demonstrations, some more arrests. I got to see the inside of a couple of prisons, but all for a short time. And what distressed me was that within the peace movement, I saw peace activists beating each other up. In other words, we were fighting peace, but we were expressing hatred within our own organizations. And you really have to walk your talk, as we all learned from Gandhi. If you can't be the change you're trying to bring in the world, why are you doing what you're doing? And I eventually disengaged from the organization I was working in, and I discovered Sulha. Sulha means reconciliation in Arabic, and it is also has been adopted by Israelis who speak Hebrew and use the word Sulha as well. If you're having an argument with someone, you say, let's make a sulha, and it means you would like to reconcile. And sulha, as opposed to some of the other organizations, was fighting occupation with love, with empathy, with listening, with a passionate desire to know the other, and the understanding that until we could put down the foundation, the interpersonal foundation, whereby human beings would trust each other, there was no chance that a political solution would be effective. That there has to be work at the top, at the political level, but there also has to be work at the bottom. And that our job is to establish that foundation of mutual trust, because any solution in the future will require cooperation between the sides. And I went to work as a volunteer. Eventually, I became the director of Sulha. Pretty soon, I hope not to be the director of Sulha. I'm 73, and it's about time some younger people moved in to the leadership of the organization. but that's where I am for the time being. And that's the short version of my little story.
How wonderful. How very nice. You know, one thing that has fascinated me, and I'm sure everyone all over the world who is going to watch this or who knows your work would ask, year after year, decades have passed. What gives you the energy to do this work that every 6 weeks you get 120 people from both sides to sit together and have dialogue? And we have all these other forces in the world who do not allow peace to occur. And yet there is something in you which keeps giving you the energy and hope to do it. Where does that come from?
It comes from the people, Anil. It comes from the Palestinians and Israelis who bravely come together in these gatherings that we do. And they bring with them their suspicion and their distrust and their fear of the other side. For many of the people at our gatherings, this is the first time that they have encountered someone from the other side. It's incredible. I live 4 kilometers from Bethlehem, but if I want to, I can avoid almost all contact with Palestinians. And many Israelis do that. And many Palestinians have never had a conversation with an Israeli. They might have met an Israeli soldier at a roadblock. They might have met an Israeli settler who is hostile to them in their own land. But they've never had the time to sit down and just look into someone's eyes and to say, who are you and who am I? And let's get to know each other. And when that happens and people break through their distrust and their fear, magic happens. Magic happens. People weep and hug and sing together, and sometimes we dance together. Anything that can create the kind of chemistry between people that will assure that these people will be willing to be partners for any future peace agreement. So it's the inspiration we get. It's the song in my heart that's singing so loudly when I leave one of these gatherings that gives us the energy to overcome the obstacles. And the army is very often not very cooperative about getting Palestinians inside Israel for these gatherings. And it takes a lot of determination to make these events happen. But we believe in what we're doing, and the payoff is the love in people's eyes when they've spent 5 hours in an evening getting to know someone that they feared 5 hours earlier. That's all I can tell you.
How very nice. Now tell me, can you describe a particular gathering when the best in humanity came out? Can you just describe to us what actually happened? What was the process like? Who were the people who came? And what actually happened? Can you take us through that journey as if we were part of the 5-hour process?
Well, let me choose one story. 2 young men, both of them about 18, 19 years old. And the Palestinian limped. He had a limp because he had been in jail in Israel and had been arrested and had been injured. And he had a permanent injury in his knee, so he was limping and active in anti-Israel demonstrations. And the Israeli was an 18-year-old named Yossi, who had just finished his high school education, and a couple of months later was to join the army, as almost all Israelis, men and women, are required to do. So I took Yossi and Amjad, this a Palestinian, and asked them if they would spend a few minutes getting to know each other. And they looked at me like I was crazy, but they agreed. And Amjad offered Yossi a cigarette, and they sat down in the corner. And for the rest of the evening, they refused to participate in the activities that we were holding because they were so deeply immersed in the conversation that developed between the two of them. And at the end of the evening, I said, listen, guys, you're going to have to, Yossi's going to have to let go of Amjad because the bus is leaving and you have to be back before the curfew. And Amjad got up on his feet and he grabbed Yossi and gave him a great big hug. And then he said, Yossi, in a couple of months, you're going to be a soldier at the roadblocks. I'm still going to be across the road throwing rocks at you. Please, my friend, be careful. And I can tell you this happened a couple of years ago, and every time I remember that moment, I'm just so moved because something amazing happens. There's this force of destiny that has Amjad throwing rocks helplessly at the roadblock, and has Yossi checking Palestinian cars at the roadblock. But somewhere in the midst of all of this violence, Amjad wanted Yossi to take care of himself and to not get hit by one of his rocks. And it's the kind of absurd situation that we live with daily. But it gives me great hope.
Oh, very nice. Now tell me, it's a very challenging task. Peacemaking requires more courage than going to war. I always believe that leaders who create peace are much stronger leaders than the ones who take their countries and their people to war. And that's my personal bias, the way I look at it, because to build enduring peace is very rare for a leader to try to strive for that. Now, what are the forces on both sides which are enabling the striving for peace and, this energy that you get? And I'm sure there are people who support your work. Could you describe to us what is that energy that is present in the region which should give us hope?
Well, generating hope these days has become increasingly difficult. I can still do it, but I was born an optimist. But there's a film, I think it's available on HBO, called The Oslo Diaries, which follows the process of peacemaking that happened in Oslo, Sweden in 1991, 2, 3. And what you see in this film is courageous people, no different from you and me, who had an enormous task, which was to bridge the gap between the Palestinians and the Israelis. They go through setback after setback. They're angry, they're disappointed. They fly home for consultations and they come back. And what you see is ordinary human beings with strong backbones who refuse to give up. And they overcome one obstacle after another. And at the end of the Oslo process, there is a signed agreement in hand. Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shake hands because of the work that the quiet diplomatic work that their people have conducted. And these peacemakers became personal friends, and they attended each other's family celebrations. And at the beginning of the process, they couldn't even talk to each other. So there's no magic. It's simply people's determination and willingness to fight through the difficulties. And as they say in the film, at any given moment, the negotiators were not sure whether they were selling their people down, selling their people's birthright, or saving their people from endless conflict. They really didn't know. And they were, they lost an enormous amount of sleep over it. But they plowed ahead and they created these agreements. And then the tragedy, of course, of Oslo is that in 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and the leadership team that was behind the signing of the agreements was unable to continue without the backing of Shimon Peres, who became prime minister immediately after the assassination. So there were many forces that led to the explosion, the disappearance of the gains that had been made in Oslo. But I think, and that's why the film is so important, we have a documented record that this is possible. And if it was done in 1991, 92, and 93, it can be done in 2021. It's been done before, the Irish made peace after 800 years of war with the British. The South Africans have created an egalitarian society, and it's not perfect, nor is the peace in Ireland perfect, but it's possible. It's possible to be on that road and to keep marching on the road. And the point is not to get to the top of the mountain, but to keep on climbing.
My last question before Karen takes over is, what has been the biggest challenge you have faced in your life so far, and how have you dealt with it? Particularly a big challenge or a particularly difficult moment, and how did you source the energy to deal with that?
Well, in the summer of 1982, like every Israeli man, I was a reserve soldier, and I was called, I was in the swimming pool on my kibbutz with my kids, and someone came over and said, you have 2 hours to join your unit, your army unit. And within 12 hours, I found myself on the border of Lebanon, about to enter the first Lebanese war. I was believing what I was told by my commanders, which is that we were under threat and we needed to go into Lebanon in order to remove this threat. And only 3 days later on the BBC did I happen to hear what was actually happening, that we were deep inside of Lebanon, that we were in the middle of Beirut, and that we were staging an aggressive war against Lebanon, against the PLO in Lebanon. And the difficulty was that I didn't believe in this war. I didn't believe that the threat of the PLO could be eliminated militarily, only diplomatically. I didn't believe in what I was doing, and yet I looked around, and here I was surrounded by my fellow soldiers whom I'd been serving with for some years, and about 30 days a year in my reserve unit. And the question was, now that I understand what's happening, do I throw down my rifle and go to jail, or do I carry on? And as an Israeli, I made the decision that I was not going to leave my fellow soldiers. And I did what I could to take care of the other soldiers as a psychologist while I was there. And during my first leave of absence, they gave us 48 hours home from the war. I went to Tel Aviv to demonstrate against the war that I was fighting. So this more or less expresses the kind of contradiction that we live with. And I guess what I'm admitting is that, like many other Israelis, I have blood on my hands. And at the same time, I don't think that disqualifies me for being a peace activist. So that was a pretty tough moment for me, that moment of decision there deep inside of Lebanon.
So as Karen has said, please start typing your questions. Meanwhile, Karen, I'm sure you have questions of your own, so please start.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Peck, for calling out Yossi and Amjad's stories, because I read through the blog and I really wanted to hear that from you, and I'm glad you narrated that to us. So thank you very much for that. The question I had was based on this story and another incident you've narrated in another blog of yours that says, even your mind sort of had a little bit of stereotypes kicking in on a day when you had a few Palestinian workers come to your yard and work on some leakage that was happening at home, right? Which just comes to say that the best of us could have stereotypes creep in. And I would admit I do too. And how do we deal? My question to you is, in our day-to-day lives, how do we deal with these stereotypes? And how do you get people who come together on a frequent basis, build trust, keeping aside the stereotypes that they have?
Well, there's no way around them. The only way is through them, I think. And Karen, you've done your homework, I see. And yes, it was a very strange feeling. We had a group of Palestinian laborers working here at home, and just just outside my front door, there were strong, impressive Palestinian laborers handling axes and shovels and sledgehammers. And I'm running back and forth between the kitchen and the workers, bringing them water and coffee, and seeing if I can make their work a little more pleasant. And yet here and there was this voice in me that said, what are you, crazy? These guys, if they wanted to, could turn their axes on you, and yes, you know, I am not free of the stereotypes. One of the most terrible costs of terrorism is that it's not only the specific terrorist act that frightens us, it's the feeding into our stereotypes that generalize about the other side. And all we can do is to be aware of those stereotypes. Sometimes in blessed moments at our Sulha gatherings, people can laugh together about the stereotypes we have. I'll never forget, I prepared a plate of food for a friend, and I put lots of hot sauce on the hummus. Why? Because Arabs like hot sauce. That's what my stereotype said. And I served it to him, and he looked at me and he said, why did you put this hot sauce on my hummus? I said, you don't like hot sauce? And suddenly I was embarrassed to find myself with another one of my stereotypes. So, you know, we can't be ashamed of them. We have to put them on the table. They happen on both sides. They have stereotypes about greedy Jews who will screw them in any transaction. And, you know, the stereotypes have been around for a long time. And all we can do is become aware of them, put them aside, and say, here I am, a person like you. Let's talk.
Thank you. It just makes sense. There's no way around it. We actually have to be aware of it and deal with it. Thank you for that. That's so profound. I do have a few questions coming in, and let me put those across to you. The first question that came in was from Mr. Khurshid Kurodi.
No,
Apologies.
not Mr.
Miss,
Miss
I'm
Kush.
sorry. I'm sorry. And I was just going to apologize if I'm going to mispronounce any of these names. So thanks for correcting me there, sir. The question is, have you heard of the West East Divan Orchestra? Edward Sett taught Miss Khurshid at Harvard. How effective do you think this project is?
Anything that brings Palestinians and Israelis together to share a common task is blessed work. You know, there are so many roads that lead to Rome. Negotiations are only one path. And at Sulha, at our organization, we use music, art, prayer, food, dancing, you know, anything. As Woody Allen said in one of his movies, whatever works, whatever breaks down the walls and melts the ice is valuable stuff. And music speaks to us. My daughter is a jazz singer, and I'm somewhat musical myself. And, you know, music is so powerful for bringing people together way beyond what words can achieve. Sometimes we get so messed up with our words that I just want to tell people to shut up and pick up some rhythm instruments and make some music, because it's wonderful. So yes, that's one of several music projects that are going on around the world to bring Palestinians and Israelis together.
Thank you. There's another question from Ms. Shivani Bhatnagar. Shivani says the definition of peace is different for different people. Some believe in following violence in their attempt to establish peace, which is completely opposite to what peace itself is. What are your views on this?
Well, I'm a reformed violent person. When I participated in anti-war demonstrations in the United States, I burned the American flag publicly. I threw rocks at policemen, and I even experienced the happiness, I'll call it, of seeing one of my rocks strike a policeman and bring him down. And then, as I grew older, I realized that that kind of behavior was just adding fuel to the fire, and that nonviolence is the only way that we can move forward. And nonviolence can be extremely assertive, as Mahatma Gandhi showed us in the Great Salt March and in so many other ways. And now I deeply believe in nonviolence. One of my good Palestinian friends spent 10 years in prison for stabbing an Israeli when he was younger, and today he's one of the leaders of a major peace organization. Violence doesn't work, and it's. I think Anil said that the work of peacemakers in many ways is harder than the work of soldiers. You know, facing someone else's violence with my own nonviolence is extremely difficult. To stand in the middle of Jerusalem at a demonstration and to be confronting a demonstrator against me who is an anti-peace demonstrator who is screaming at me, too bad you didn't die in Auschwitz with the rest of your family. Now that's verbal violence of the highest degree. And while my instinct is to just attack him physically, my maturity has convinced me that someone behaves violently out of a profound sense of helplessness, that violence is weakness, and that it only looks like strength. And that if I can find the frightened person inside that violent exterior, I might be able to make a difference.
Thank you.
Your answer did remind us of Mahatma Gandhi as well, and his non-violent ways of bringing the country to independence. Thank you for that. I have another question from Mr. Rajan Makhijani. Rajan says that there's
Rajan.
Rajan. Okay,
Yeah.
Rajan Makhijani, who says there's an increasing tribe of Indians that admire the Israeli offensive strategies of violence and advocate this use of the same sort of a strategy for India against Pakistan and even minorities within India. How do you advise we respond to these brethren of ours?
How do we respond? How to respond to what?
To these brethren of ours who who are inspired by these Israeli offensive strategies and think that India should be using something similar against our neighboring country, Pakistan. How do we respond to them? How do we strike a dialogue with them?
Well, if you look at what happened both in South Africa and in Ireland, the only way that peace was achieved was by people who were using their words rather than their weapons. It has to be about talking. And one of the most distressing moments in my conversations with aggressive Israelis who are opposed to any compromise with the Palestinians is when I ask them what their vision of the future is. Because I've never heard a decent response to that question. When someone who doesn't trust and doesn't want to build trust and believes that the only way to be secure is to be strong and to overcome the other side, when you ask this person, what is the vision of the future that you see, he has no answer. He cannot describe, what is peace? Peace can be described. I can envision sharing water resources and sharing culture and sharing, taking care of medical needs. This COVID virus, if we don't help the Palestinians with it, they're just going to infect us. Again, it's a wonderful metaphor for how inevitable the cooperation is. And if you have a strategy that includes violence, you'd better be able to say what it is you're striving for. Because we, the peace movement, we know what we're heading towards. We know what we're working for. And I still have not heard a viable description of the aggressive side's future. And if you can't envision a future, then why are you doing what you're doing?
Thank you. Dialogue is the key. I think is something we can take to people we have this conversation with. Thank you for that. We have a question from Dr. Ajay Agarwal, who says, in Anand Kumaraswamy's book, The Dance of Shiva, it is mentioned that violence, even in thoughts, is equivalent to violence. What would you say to this?
Well, I think we're responsible for what we do in life. Sometimes I get very angry, and I imagine expressing my anger violently. I have to have the freedom of my thoughts in order to breathe, in order to live. And you know, I have a fireplace in my house, and I collect wood in the forest for my fireplace. So when I am feeling aggressive, I take my axe to the forest and I find some dead trees to chop up. And I put my aggression on those trees, and then I gather them together and put them in the back of my car and bring them home so I can warm my house. There are positive things that we can do with our aggression, but I think stifling our thoughts is not productive. And I say that as a psychologist. We have to be free to think and feel what we think and feel if we're going to go beyond them, our feelings and our thoughts. And, you know, people talk about prisoners, convicts, criminals in prison as though they're some kind of other race of people. They're people just like you and me. The only difference between us and them is that we all want to beat up on someone. It's just that you and I know how to control ourselves, so we don't do it. But that doesn't mean we don't have those thoughts.
It does remind me of what you say, that anger leads to hatred, leads to violence, is something you said in one of your blogs as well. So expression of anger, that was a very different perspective on that. So do we have time for one last question?
No, there are many more, lots of time. So Karen, please read out a question of Rami Mukhija, who is a former board member of Larsen and Toubro and a great friend. It's in the chat box.
It's in the chat box, okay. Okay. Yes, I see the question now. Rami Mukhija's question is, what is the permanent solution for peace between Israel and Palestine, in your views?
You know, they say you get two Jews together, you'll get three opinions. And I think it's true of Palestinians as well. Everyone has a different plan for the future. And I think one of my achievements in the last couple of years is giving up my certainty about how the future solution will look. I don't know. You know, we presently have about 500,000 settlers in Israel living in the occupied territories that have never, for 53 years, have not been recognized by the international community as being legitimate Israeli territory. Is it possible that in order to create a two-state solution, we will evacuate 500,000 settlers from the occupied territories? I don't think so. And I can't find anyone who believes that we can succeed in what we used to talk about as the two-state solution. So now there are out-of-the-box plans, interesting, fascinating, new thinking that's going on about how the process of getting to peace could look. But my favorite one is called Two States, One Homeland. In other words, Palestine, Israel with a border, but the border is open like in Europe, so that people, because there's security in this future state, people can go back and forth. And an Indian citizen can buy a house in California, so a Palestinian citizen can buy a house or rent a house in Israel, but he will vote or she will vote in the elections in Palestine. They will be Palestinian citizens we will be Israeli citizens, and the settlers who live deep inside Palestinian territory, they will be Israeli citizens protected by a Palestinian police force. And some people say, you know, you have to be crazy to think that's possible. But it doesn't seem any less possible than than evacuating 100,000 committed Israeli citizens from the occupied territories. The key will rest on people's willingness to understand and acknowledge that we cannot be safe as long as they do not feel safe. So many people set this up as a zero-sum game where any strengthening of Israel rests on a weakening of Palestine. It won't work that way. We have to make the Palestinians comfortable, secure, able to get work, able to send their children to school and not worry about whether they're going to come home or not. As soon as the Palestinians have that state of affairs, they will be good neighbors to Israelis. But getting Israelis and Palestinians to make the leap and to understand that the other side's security is in our self-interest, that's a very difficult psychological leap. But without it, there is no future.
Right. Karen, there are questions from Rama Raju Dasarada.
Yes, I'm going to take that question. That's such a beautiful vision you just described for Israel and Palestine. So the next question I see is from Rama Raju Dasarada, who says, does any global leader really understand the root cause for extreme thinking or thinkers? If so, why don't we as a human race follow the same route of peace to resolve these issues with our fellow humans?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
He's asking that does any global leader truly understand what is the root cause for this extreme thinking of people who tend to be thinking in extremes? And why can't the human race just treat each other as fellow human beings? Why do you think that is happening? I mean, that's the frustration that is striking him, and he's asking that question.
Well, sadly enough, Nelson Mandela is gone, Mahatma Gandhi is gone, Martin Luther King is not here, and I think there's a big vacuum of responsible, inspired leadership in the world today. That's the bad news. The good news is that when there are no established leaders to turn to, the only people we can turn to are each other, and to bring forth our own leadership. The leadership of people like Anil, people who are willing to take a stand for the possibility of educating young people in an inspired environment. You know, each of us has a leader inside of us. And leaders are not born. Leaders are created, build themselves, take risks. And every time you take a risk and you succeed, you become a greater leader. And every time you take a risk and you fail and you learn something from your failure, you become a greater leader. So I think the good news about the leadership vacuum is that we are now thrown upon ourselves to develop our own ability to lead each other forward.
Yes. And that's why Anthony Jaraman's comment rather than a question, which Karen, you want to read Anthony's comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Anthony seems to have made this as an observation or comment that persons from both sides physically meeting and mixing together like you are achieving through your work, Mr. Peck, is actually the beginning of a peace process. So that's what Mr. Anthony Jairanjan has mentioned.
And in the audience today, I'm so happy that Nader Godrej, the Godrej family and Nader, and I know he writes wonderful poetry, and if he was here, he would probably be writing verse. And I just wonder if Nader, you are moved to share some of your poetry, because I know that that's something wonderful. And if you are moved to share, we can encourage you to speak up if there is anything you want to say. We can, Nader is here, so allowed to talk. So Nader, you are allowed to talk now if you want to say something, because I know your heart is full of this kind of emotion. So would you like to say something, Nader?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Nader, we can hear you.
Okay. Since you asked about extreme views, many years ago, I wrote a poem when there was a lot of talk of the Babri Masjid, and this poem was written before it was knocked down. So this is the poem I wrote then.
Yes.
The gods conduct their proxy wars with us as foolish dupes, and on the sacred river shores are ranged to different groups. It seems that now a mosque does stand where once a temple stood, and for this little piece of land, we lose our brotherhood. Should we fight on for fierce gods or fight the gods themselves? Must we obey their slightest nods or think it out ourselves? And can we dare tempt Rushdie's fate and take the gods head on? For if we all stand by and wait, our nation will be gone.
How wonderful. How wonderful.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'd love to see a copy of that poem.
Sure.
Nader, don't send it. Yes, please. And I'll be happy to share it with you. And, I'll also connect you because I think some of what you feel are so similar to what Yoav is all about. So thank you. So Karen, we are getting to the end of the hour. So what is your own experience like, Karen? How would you like to describe that?
I think I experienced the power of deep listening just to the first 30 minutes of when Mr. Peck was describing the work. I think I experienced one of the sessions where he said there's song, there's dance, there's conversation. So I almost felt like I was a part of it. So thank you. And it does inspire me to, be the change in my own life and just take baby steps towards making a positive change around me. That's how I experience.
Thank you, Karen. And for you, Christmas is a very special occasion. You are about to rush off to your mass in a church 5 minutes drive away. I really appreciate your taking this evening, but I wanted you to be close to my friend who lives close to the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and therefore I invited you. So thank you.
Anil and Karen, if I hope it will work, I have a Daniel in Bethlehem took a very short, it's like less than a minute film of Bethlehem, and I will try to do it on the share screen.
Please.
Okay. So first, I should go to share screen, right?
Yes.
And then
play the video.
Can you see it?
Yes.
We can, yes.
That's the Omar Mosque. And there is the Church of the Nativity. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I felt a better version of myself emerging. And there was this resolve going on in my heart. Many years back, I was involved in dialogue between India and Pakistan. I made several trips to Pakistan, and I managed to get people together to talk. And then, because of other things that we have done in my life and I do, this has not been a place of constant focus. And I was asking myself, what would happen if some of us were to start that process regardless of whatever happens? So there is some such emotion that is arising in my heart, and I hope I'll follow up on that and do something about it, because you have made me experience the power of doing something. And what your life represents, you do the right thing because that is the right thing to do. And you do it again and again and again because we all believe in our common humanity. There is always hope because there is life. And your life is a living testimony that right from your younger days, when you spoke up, and I was so thrilled to know that you were with King himself, Martin Luther King, in the same bus. What an amazing experience. He's my all-time hero. And to have those kinds of ideals, and for you to train yourself to say, this is my work, this is my life, and I source my own inspiration because this matters. I think if there are more of us who say, I'm going to do the right thing, I'm going to do it despite all the rocks, despite all the verbal abuse, despite all the pessimists, and despite all the people telling me otherwise, I think then there is going to be a future hope. So thank you very much. That is also the message from our Lord Jesus. That is also the message that the Lord Krishna teaches in Bhagavad Gita. That is what the Quran teaches. That is what the Zoroastrian religion teaches. That is what all good faith teaches, that we are all together and that we are one humanity. And I think COVID has reminded us of that. So thank you very much for being with us today. And really blessings to everybody. Thank you for sharing your evening with us. And thank you, Karen. You need to go.
Thanks, everyone. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm deeply appreciative of the opportunity to be with you. And thank you so much for inviting me to come along today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Make my day.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.